Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Michael Barham, EPIP's Membership and Operations Manager, and this is our fifth EPIP webinar of 2015, Social Justice Trends in New Media, How New Civil Rights Movements Take Shape. As you can see, we are doing a little something different today. We are sharing our webcams as well as our screens, so we hope you like that. Always down to have fun and experiment. So again, thanks for joining. Excited to explore this topic. As many of you have seen, we're kind of exploring what takes place after the hashtag when you post your support in a comment or even a 10-second video. Does the intended impact have a lasting effect? As new media platforms are created, civil rights issues have gotten attention much faster than ever before, but the challenge for supporters to stay connected to a cause once it's no longer a trending topic has increased exponentially. So in this webinar, we're going to be exploring civil rights trends, how they've taken shape in 21st century using a new media lens. We're joined by Sharon Rice. She's the Director of Community Relations with Generosity.org, and Brian Mercer of Media Mobilizing Project, and we'll examine the role media played in advancing the initial civil rights movement, discuss how new media platforms have helped to shape current civil rights movements, and explore how supporters can join the conversation and hopefully not get lost in the trends. So we're going to get started really soon with the conversation. I'll walk through a few items of housekeeping and introduce our speakers in a bit more detail pretty soon. But before I do, I want to familiarize those of you who may not know too much about EPIP with who we are and what we do. We're a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs and other change makers who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. That's philanthropy with in a lot of different forms, big P, small p, so whether you're working in institutional philanthropy, working for a nonprofit, working on the periphery of kind of the social sector, or you just practice philanthropy in your personal life, we certainly want to be a place for you. So what do? We provide a platform for our community to connect with others, learn and practice leadership skills, and inspire emerging transformative thoughts in the social sector. We do this through a lot of different platforms. Certainly our webinar platform, with many of you are familiar with, our national conference, which I'll talk a bit more about later on, and local events. Many of you live near a local chapter. We have 12 of them nationwide, and those are really kind of the hubs of our EPIP activities. So happy to be doing things in a lot of different places. So what's next for EPIP? Well, I mentioned the national conference, May 12th to 14th in New Orleans, Louisiana. We're very excited about this one. If you haven't been to a conference with EPIP, this is definitely the one to make it to. Early bird registration is actually expiring today. There are great deals there, and if you haven't had the chance to learn about the conference, I suggest going there right after this webinar, checking out our website, taking a look. There's a lot to learn, and we're in the process of finalizing a lot of that content, so we're really excited about that. Also, the next EPIP webinar is taking place April 15th, 4 weeks from today, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be talking about developing your career narrative, so taking a more granular approach and hoping to help folks kind of hone that narrative with Monisha Kapila. She's the founder of ProInspires, an organization built to develop leaders at all levels for organizations addressing the world's greatest challenges. Monisha does a ton of events. She's a great public speaker, so I highly suggest you all check that out. And lastly, MC Mall is our seven-month applied learning platform. We're focusing on a new skill each month. This month's being social justice and racial analysis, obviously very fitting for today's call. Join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag EPIP leaders, and follow us on Twitter at EPIP National. And as always, for events near you, nationally, webinars, all that good stuff is up on epip.org/events. And as you all have seen, we have a ton going on. I've mentioned a lot of our local and national events. Hopefully this webinar will whet your appetite for getting more involved with EPIP. It's a great time to do so, obviously, with the conference coming up and plenty on the docket for the spring. So please feel free to reach out to me or check out epip.org/membership for more information. Okay, we're going to get started really soon. Just a few items on the agenda. One, where after I speak, and I promise I'll be done soon, you're going to hear from Sharon with Generosity. Sharon will toss it to Brian with Media Mobilizing Project, and then we'll save some time. We'll reserve some time for Q&A. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please use the question box. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout. You can use that if you have technical difficulties, audio difficulties, or if you just have general content questions. We'll take those on a first-come, first-served basis and make sure to share those with Brian and Sharon when we get to the Q&A segment. We are recording this webinar as well, and we'll put it up on our website within about a week, along with the slides and some other resources. So please keep that in mind and complete the post-webinar survey if you have, just to help us kind of get through the process and learn a little bit more about how we can improve our program. So keep a lookout for that. And now to our panelists. So we are joined again by Sharon Rice, who is an EPIP National Board member, steering committee member for EPIP Philadelphia, and Director of Community Relations for Generosity.org. Sharon has a background in social services and child welfare and made the transition 3 years ago to her current work, which focuses on community engagement, public speaking, and philanthropy. As I said, after Sharon, we'll hear from Brian. Brian is a Philadelphia native who began volunteering with Media Mobilizing Project back in 2008 after returning home from college. Brian's now co-executive director, using strategic media and communications to strengthen and connect communities organizing for their human rights. Brian also works on state and national media policy advocacy with the Media Action Grassroots Network to create a ground-up approach to securing media rights and access. Brian received his bachelor's degree from Columbia University in anthropology and comparative ethnic studies. Okie doke, folks, that is it from me, and what I'm going to do now is toss it over to Sharon. And like I said, if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to pose them in the question box, and we're going to hear from Sharon shortly.
Thanks, Michael.
Sure, Sharon. Hang on one second. I am going to toss it over to you. You should have the option to share your screen.
Great. Is everyone? Is it up there?
It is up there. We can see it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for that great intro, and thank you to all of those who are joining us today. I'm really excited about this webinar and excited to have been able to partner with Brian and his really awesome organization. So, as you know, we are looking at social justice trends in new media and how the new civil rights movements in the 21st century have taken shape. It is something that, with the work that I do at Generosity, that we are very considerate of in terms of hashtags. And I have been to several different talks on the valid use of this form of media. So I hope that you find this topic as intriguing as I do. But really quick first, before we get into the content, I want to do a quick poll. There was a plethora of hashtags that happened in 2014. I'm sure many of these you've seen and heard of, but I just wanted to kind of get a sense from the audience, from the listed hashtag that you see on the screen right now, how many of these issues have you gotten involved with that after the hashtag went viral? And I'm thinking in terms of discussions or even just real-time activities. So just take a few minutes I think Michael's going to commandeer my screen again just to answer that question. And just
I
kind of
am going to
see what the numbers
commandeer it
are.
very briefly, Sharon. So folks, keep a lookout and and please just answer the question that we're showing there from the listed hashtags. How many have you gotten involved with in real time? You have just 3 options there, so it shouldn't take too long. We'll give you just maybe 20 to 30 more seconds. This is also how we make sure you're paying attention, so we're watching. All right, looks like most of those folks have voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. It looks like an interesting split. 64% have been involved with a few of those, 36% only online. So no one really involved with all or most of those hashtags. So that's interesting to see. And Sharon, I'm going to hide that poll, and then we should bounce back to your screen.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for participating in that poll, everyone. Yeah, so I'll loop back to this at the end, but I just wanted to just dive right into what we're talking about today. So as I'm sure most of you know, there was a huge civil rights movement that took place in the 1950s and the 60s, and obviously it has changed the way we look at marginalized communities since that time. This is just a really quick timeline of some of the highlighted moments during that initial civil rights movement and some of the key points that people really focused on, particularly around the media. All of these issues had some sort of media announcement that was made, whether it was television or newspaper, and certainly this linear model is also representative of the way media used to run during that era. It was a call to action for activists and those who were working to promote what was happening in the civil rights movement at the time. They had this to work off of. So looking back, there was an article that was written in actually 1987. There was a brief convening at the University of Mississippi with journalists and civil rights activists who were involved in the movement at the time, just talking about sort of their role and how they shaped that whole entire decade of transformation for Black folks in the South. And it was an opportunity for Black activists to really give a different lens, a different voice to Black Americans who were suffering injustices put upon them by various systems at that moment. What the convening highlighted, it was at the University of Michigan, and it highlighted was that the role that Black media played was able to show the true nature of the movement. We at the first time saw really a strong representation of what the Bloody Sunday looked like and who were involved in this movement and those major players. The journalists had a particular interest in showing compelling news to talk about what was happening in the South. I think it was the first time that people were able to actually see this very strong representation of injustice that was occurring. But one of the key takeaways for this convening, a lot of the journalists and the activists during this time talked about the limitations, particularly around print and television. In television, for instance, there wasn't a built-in system to show the true behind the scenes story of the civil rights movement. Many of the journalists at that time didn't really know how they could even begin to show that full story and show the full breadth of what was occurring. So they really were only able to capture sort of in that moment those shots, but the players behind it and those who worked to convene it, the foundations, freedom funders as they're known, weren't really part of that discussion at that time. So what they had was an opportunity to begin to build that into movements like this. In terms of print, Jet Magazine was actually noted as being the first magazine to show a really gripping photo of one of the people during the civil rights movement that was actually murdered. And this started to change the image. It changed the voice around this movement, and it gave the public a meaningful opportunity to get involved. And so a lot of allies came alongside of the civil rights activists at that time to show their full support. And it was really from what the article talked about in the LA Times, is that a lot of the journalists found that they began their careers really looking at a more in-depth analysis of what was happening in the community and really support these marginalized voices. We fast forward to the 21st century, and now we have new media, which is basically just has been coined as digital activism. So this embodies everything from the internet, ways that we can access this information faster, blogs, wikis, online newspapers, social media, websites, and even video games. This hyperlinked ability for us to connect to not just what's happening the day that news is reported, but also going back to historical data that kind of give us a full picture of what's occurring. And this is really the impact of journalists at that time questioning how much they should get involved and how deep of a dive they can do in public movements like that. So what is new media? What is hashtag activism? What is slacktivism? All of these wonderful things. So as you saw on the first slide, all of those hashtags represent something that occurred in 2014 around the world, and all of these hashtags went viral. It has been referred to as hashtag activism, which is just basically a coined term for Twitter users to take a particular issue, make it a movement, and then continue that movement in the digital space. Looking at some of the complaints around digital activism, we see this term called slacktivism, which is basically this questioning, are folks who are getting involved in the new media debate and around some of these civil rights movements, are they really just using the hashtags as a way to sort of take a lesser role in playing out the full impact of these movements? People just tweeting about things, not really getting involved. But through some of the work that we do, we know that there's organizations who are doing really great things to help keep that movement alive and to move it beyond just the hashtag itself. So I did want to go through just a couple of hashtags and just a few of them that actually went viral and then actually turned into other, other movements that continue today. So for instance, we have hashtag Black Lives Matter, which I'm sure most people have heard of. This actually started during the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman trial. So Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, this was their response to that trial. And what we found was that they wanted to begin to really create some dialogue around what was occurring, this sort of travesty of justice for Trayvon and his family. And then the debate was reignited in 2014 with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. As a result of that particular hashtag, several other hashtags popped up, and it continued to push this story to the front. So the whole purpose of the hashtag was not just to stymie what occurred, but was intended to continue the conversation, to let people know that there were people in the fight to see this change, to continue this conversation, and to make things happen beyond just the media. Another popular hashtag that happened in 2014 was called the Umbrella Revolution. This was relatively ignored by the U.S. media, but it was a group of Hong Kong residents on September 14th responding to their government's decision to end civil nominations of candidates. And instead of letting the people vote freely, a committee would elect candidates before the public could vote on them. And so this hashtag went viral, and the term umbrella was used to kind of throw back to a time when protesters were attacked with pepper spray and various other objects to get them to stop protesting. and they used the umbrellas to defend themselves against this. What happened past just the hashtag was that there was international awareness of these incidents, and it skyrocketed. And polls of Hong Kong residents show that 59% of the supporters of the protesters were in support of what the protesters were doing. In October 23rd, the UN agreed. The UN urged China to give in to the protesters' demand to allow free elections. So there's definitely plenty of movement that occurs even beyond this. MI Next is another popular hashtag that at least in my research, I found that probably didn't represent exactly what everyone thought it did. It actually originated as a way to spread awareness about the high rates of disappearances and murders of the Indigenous women in Canada. But what this hashtag did, which I thought was pretty unusual, was that it didn't just link people to the incidences in Canada, but it gave people a reason to connect with a whole different community. So what you found was that people in the Black community who were dealing with the Michael Brown incident and various other incidents that happened in 2014 found some commonality in a group of women who were being attacked in Canada, which really did spur a lot of meaningful action by Amnesty International and the UN, but it also spurred a lot of action among community members and feeling connected in this war against injustice, and really working together to shed some light on these things that just don't need to occur anymore. A fourth and fairly popular and continued hashtag is Why I Stayed. And of course, this is one that's related to domestic violence. This hashtag in particular was started by Beverly Godin, a writer and a Black woman and a survivor of a violent marriage, who encouraged her followers to confront the victim, blaming with their own stories. The trend that this started went far beyond, I think, what anyone would have expected. What it turned into was a story-sharing platform for those who suffered through domestic violence to feel no longer feel ashamed to hide and to share their story and find commonality and find some peer-to-peer support. It later went on to promote figures like Meredith Vieira to talk publicly about her own particular situation, and it just works to change the face of all of these issues. So much like the journalists at the time of the original civil rights movement, we see these hashtags working to share a story that people have never heard before. It's working to change the face of what those issues look like, and it also works to actually spur some action. And everything that I talked about just now, I found in an article called 12 Hashtags That Changed the World in 2014. It was posted December 19th by Yes Magazine. So there's plenty of grassroots organizations and grassroots journalists who are taking these hashtags and following it through to get a behind-the-scenes look, but also to continue to ask the question of where do these hashtags go once they're created and once they take root in our lexicon. And then I moved on to some other interesting information around Twitter diplomacy. There is an entire world of real leaders who utilize Twitter as a way to connect to the common public and also to other diplomats around the world. And Twitdiplomacy.com runs a series of reports on the activity of world leaders, including President Obama and his administration, to use Twitter as a way to promote issues like Bring Back Our Girls, or to even just talk to other diplomats around the world to figure out how they can better resolve some of the issues that are occurring. So as trivial as sometimes the hashtag might seem, there is a lot of work that gets done in a larger capacity for folks to not just have discussions, but do some actual meaningful work around changing the conversation and changing the landscape and giving voice to a community that doesn't normally have it. And I just wanted to really quick just kind of give you some statistics on a few of the hashtags. I'm actually talking about the Why I Stayed one. This is just some information from a site called keyhole.com, and what they do is they track users who are tweeting out all of these hashtags that go viral and sort of their range and their reach. And as you can see, this reach is pretty significant. This is actually data that was taken on March 16th and 17th. So since that time, 2014, when Why I Stayed went viral initially, this hashtag has continued to reach over 400,000 individuals with over 600,000 impressions, meaning that people are still talking about this issue, people are still engaging with their community, and there's a couple of awesome organizations that are listed there, nomore.org and Campus Involvement, who are continuing to get involved in the conversation. So it's likely that a lot of these hashtags and a lot of this online activism will continue well beyond the just the hashtag its initial start. And this is just a great snapshot of additional stories that came up as a result of this hashtag being started. And one of the things that we see with this type of activism is a sharing of multiple stories and a sharing of a community that's connected state to state and worldwide. So none of these, if you were to click on any of these story links, you could be linked to a number of people from around the world, both victims and also allies in the fight against domestic violence or any other issue that might pop up. So the overall impact of new media is that you have people who are beginning to look at the ability to harness what's happening on Twitter as a way to capture both stories and also do real action. I just wanted to point out Jasmine Burnett. She's actually an activist here in Philadelphia, and she has done a lot of work around Black Twitter to the point where she was invited to People to People, which was a virtual conference that took place in September of last year, where leaders from both the State Department and also other activists and grassroots participants talked about the influence of Black Twitter. Jasmine has been an extremely vocal voice in this fight and this debate, and also in the promotion of Twitter and the hashtag movement and what that really can do for marginalized communities. EPIP Philadelphia recently started its Giving Circle, and one of the key characteristics of our Giving Circle is that we focus on not an organization, but we focus on connecting ourselves to a connector who has a better understanding of a particular community or a particular issue. And a lot of the work that we have done is we did a lot of research with some of these hashtags alone to see how are they trending in Philadelphia and how can a Giving Circle harness the power of crowdsourcing to really promote funding some of these issues, some of the movements that occur to help eradicate some of these issues that are happening. And generosity.org, which is my awesome organization that I work for, we definitely are not unfamiliar with the hashtag arena or Twitter itself, and we actively participate in Twitter chats that's about monthly around a variety of topics within social impact. And we use our own hashtag Philly Changer, and just to promote leaders who are doing really great things in social impact. So beyond just promoting an issue, we have found a way to harness promoting folks who are doing some really great work around social impact that are linked to some of these other issues. And we're able to link to great organizations like Media Mobilizing Project, which you'll hear from in a minute, around some of the work that they're doing. So that's just a really quick kind of overview of new media and sort of how it's transformed since the initial civil rights movement. It definitely was something that didn't remain stymied, and I think journalists took a really active role in promoting other ways to gather and collect information from the community members and really just begin to continue to change that face of these stories as we go on. So Brian, I am actually at the end, so I'm just going to pass it over to you.
Brian, you should have the option to share your screen momentarily.
All right, great. Let me just get this set up then, everyone. Okay, great. And then do you see my full screen slides?
Full and clear.
Okay, great. First, it's really exciting to be a part of this discussion. And thank you, Sharon, for asking me to take part, and Michael for setting things up. It's a topic and subject matter that's been really important to me. And I thought maybe as a way to share some of that, just like three quick things about me. One, while I was in school, while I was a freshman in school, I signed up for Facebook. And so I think I probably was part of the first 100,000 people to use Facebook, which is kind of crazy to think, but now it's something that there's about 500 million active users around the world participating and communicating through this shared like social media platform. Another thing about myself, the kind of boldest political act I've ever taken is when a friend asked me to participate in a hunger strike against neighborhood gentrification. And so I went on a hunger strike for 7 days. And then just one other anecdote, when the night that Darren Wilson was not indicted for the murder of Michael Brown, I joined a march here in Philadelphia that I heard about on Facebook because it showed me and made me think about, what is this world going to look like for my little son who's growing up. And so, yeah, I think there's just this amazing power to social media, this amazing power to how it's allowing people to connect with each other, and it's exciting to get the chance to talk more about that with everyone today. And I think as a jumping off point in that discussion, I really liked what Sharon was bringing out for the debate around the role of social media and new media and its effectiveness. And one of the pieces I actually think about a lot, and we reference here in our work at Media Mobilizing Project, is this article written by Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell, well-known author for his book, The Tipping Point, he writes regularly, or at least at this point, wrote regularly in The New Yorker. He published this piece, Small Change, Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted, back in 2010, and he was in part responding to the Twitter revolutions in Moldova and Iran. I think kind of seeing what would break out in Egypt even before it happened. And I think one of the really important things about this argument that he's making, looking at the civil rights movement, looking at the bus boycotts and the lunch counter sit-ins, is what did it take for people to participate in these things? And he argues that one of the things that's really glossed over in some of the excitement around new and social media is the role that being social plays in social movements. And so as a part of that, he tries to understand the difference between strong ties and loose ties. And when you look at the lunch counter sit-ins in the 1960s, what you have are, it's not just a finely crafted message that's influencing people. It's these strong ties where people were asked by folks in the same college dorm room as them to participate in these actions. And I think what that means, those personal connections, it means that people are able to take risks, or at least willing and open to taking risks. And I think that that's something from the traditional civil rights organizing that we need to remember and keep as a part of our kind of toolkit of social movement work, of social justice work. I mean, he also looks at the loose ties, and while the loose ties of online and social media are often impersonal, they allow for many connections at once, and they allow and facilitate these kind of low-risk actions taking place. And so I think the kind of explosions of activity and representing all the hashtags that Sharon lays out really represents how by tapping these loose ties, there's a set of emotion that's built. And I think if we combine those loose ties with strong ties, then we get much more powerful acts. And the Black Lives Matters movement, I think, really shows that example pretty well. At Media Mobilizing Project, one of the phrases that we often say is that movements begin with the telling of untold stories. And with that in mind, we see that stories and media are transformative and help to spark movements, help to be a starting point for where movements can launch off from. And so I want to talk about a little bit of the way that our work marries this media work with this movement work, marries these strong ties and loose ties together. And I think just a moment that represents that and shows that pretty well is this thing that we do every year called our annual community building dinner. And at that community building dinner, we have people from across all the little projects that we've done throughout the year meet and come together for a celebration. There's a short program, there's food, there's some entertainment, and I think one thing that's just really important about this moment is, you know, in the communities of social justice organizing that we touch in the Philadelphia region, there's not a lot of times to step back and celebrate the work. And I think there's also not a lot of times where people get the chance to connect across different issues in organizing. And so having these physical spaces is really, really important for facilitating that. And we pair that with a video montage that we produce every year. And that video montage shows images and moments from throughout the year. And what it does is it reflects back for folks the important struggles that they're a part of. And it helps to build connections and ties where often that work is isolated or separated from each other. And it's been really powerful and exciting to watch how this kind of media experience paired with this really traditional dinner with each other can be a transformative thing for how folks are relating in the city and how folks understand the importance of what they're doing. And so to share another example, going back a little bit, and this example is a hashtag we created in 2013. And Under Attack, the public sector media project, it was really created to respond to a crisis that we saw unfolding in the public sector and with our public services. So in 2013, a list was put out proposing to close 60 of the city's schools. The city workers, like the folks who collect our trash or the folks who run human services, they had gone almost 4 years at that point, 5 years at that point, without a contract. We saw these major cuts in the budget for city funding, and so we knew that actually this situation wasn't unique to Philadelphia, that there were communities across the country experiencing these issues with their public sector services and attacks on public sector workers. But we also knew that there would be a lot of activity in this moment, and our kind of traditional way of producing short videos wouldn't be able to quickly respond. And so what we thought to do is use this hashtag and use social media as a way to capture an overarching moment, to respond quickly to what was happening, and really also, I think, just articulate and tap the concerns and discontent that was already out there. One of the powerful things to me around hashtags and social media is that it facilitates a breaking down of the isolation that people often feel. It gives a platform and a voice for folks to express what's going on. And I think being able to create hashtags that speak to different moments is where, particularly with this Under Attack moment, we saw our successes. And so what we did specifically, we created 2 Facebook groups. Really quickly, hundreds of people joined these Facebook groups. We focused them around issues of public education and issues of public sector workers. And you know, part of what was great about just having a general Facebook group and like different from a page is that it was really simple and really participatory. That it actually kind of took the idea of media production for us and flipped it on its head. because it wasn't just the media that we were producing, but and just a simple distribution to people, but it was actually, you know, having a community of folks making things and contributing those things. And then it was also relationship building, that we were actually seeing and connecting with people that we wouldn't have connected with before, and reaching new rings of people in these online spaces. And then from those online spaces, able to create moments and opportunities to follow up with people. I think the other, one of the cool things that kind of arose out of this hashtag was this act of personal testimony. We asked people to share their stories of education and what their schools meant to them. And what happened on this Facebook feed for this group is that people started sharing these stories and attaching a photo of themselves. And there were these powerful stories about the role and the impact that public education had on them, and the importance of their teachers, and what they thought it would mean to the city if these schools were closed, if these services were cut. You know, and I think one of the things that became really powerful about that moment was that it was just so accessible, and so powerful. And you know, we had in the past spent hundreds of hours producing a single half-hour video, or would spend months trying to craft the perfect message in a audio or radio piece. But then by having a platform and a way to capture what people were feeling, and for folks to be able to share that within a community, it was almost as if instantaneously these powerful stories were able to come out. And so I think the accessibility of this work, that people could really do these things and participate in these things with a cell phone, is a really a kind of turning point moment. And I think it starts to break down the digital divide, which, you know, is very real in a city like Philadelphia. It's very real in cities across the country, where you know, when folks have to decide what bills they can afford to pay, internet is often the first to go, where companies like Comcast charge outlandish rates for services. And so, I mean, I think, yeah, I think the power of the cell phone and accessibility of these new tools really shouldn't be discounted. You know, and I guess just to start to wrap up, because I'd really like to have the space for discussion and to hear people's thoughts also. And on some takeaways in a formal sense, we're not, the project of Under Attack is something we did in 2013, but a bunch of things from that project still live on, actually without our intervention. So that education Facebook group that we started, it's remained a hub for activists and organizers to coordinate around issues in public schools. And by experimenting with the Under Attack hashtag, it actually led us to work and focus more on issues of public education. After you know, 24 of those 60 schools were closed, we started building relationships with parents, with students who were impacted by those closures in those school communities, and it allowed us to explore new ways of storytelling with people, and take those lessons and tools with us into the next steps, which, you know, makes me think one of the things, just if there's anything folks take away from this, experiment, 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 you know. I think a lot of this social media work is really about just trying new things, and then bringing the lessons from those new things into your next project. And then I think also that the work, you know, can really be at the scale that's important and works for you. So you don't have to create the hashtag that has hundreds of thousands of followers, or is a viral sensation overnight. If it's something that allows for the communities that you're trying to reach to communicate with each other, and to build a shared understanding of their shared situation. And so just to close, you know, one of the kind of iterations of this work we're now doing is this parent story collecting project. And we're going out to talk to parents. We're using cell phones, and we're using small mirrorless cameras, and we're doing these kind of on-the-street interviews and interviews at parent-teacher conferences and hearing stories of parents and what's important to them about public education. And it's been this amazing process of testimony and storytelling. And I think we're really excited to use social media as a way to also connect these parents with each other around the city and build new platforms for not just parents, but folks throughout the region to participate more in shaping and defining what should happen with our public schools. So yeah, that's the main stuff I have. And then this is Sharon and mine's contact info, and I'm guessing we're going to open it up now so we can really hear from all of you and get some discussion going.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was really interesting. And of course, Sharon. Folks, so what we want to do, as Brian mentioned, is open it up for Q&A. And I definitely want to take advantage of the expertise, the new media experts we have in the room or in space. So please take this opportunity, throw in a few questions, type them into your question box. I'll be keeping an eye there. We probably have about 10 minutes. In the meantime, I actually have a question of my own for you two new media experts. And Brian, you talked a bit to this about how kind of hashtags can take it to the next level. And to me, it seems very difficult to predict, even if you have something that might, be part of a larger movement and might be a really compelling, short hashtag. But it seems like in some cases these things just catch fire, and in other cases they don't gain any traction. And I guess I'm wondering, and obviously in some cases it's about taking a few different approaches, right? So it's not just throwing out the hashtag, but starting a Facebook group around that and doing a few different things at once. But I'm just wondering, for folks out there trying to start a movement with the hashtag, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is thinking about what's happening offline. That really the offline work is the kind of anchor of what happens online, and the online helps to amplify that. I mean, I think another thing that we've seen a lot is the power of the prompt. To have a really powerful prompt. So how are you inviting people to participate in the conversation? And I think there's definitely a difference in participation we've seen when you ask a question, even just in an interview practice, when you ask a question that kind of closes out the ability for people to tell their stories, right? If you can figure out the way to frame your issue, talk about your issue, invite people to tell their stories, then I think that is a part of the road to success. And then the other thing, I think it doesn't, not everything has to be viral. If it is speaking to who you want to speak to, then that could be your starting point. So.
Good answer. I like that. Actually had a question come in from Aaron. This is an interesting question. Has there been an instance where the movement around the hashtag has gone wrong? Anything you guys know
of? That's a great question. I don't know that a hashtag has gone wrong. I think sometimes hashtags can get associated with other movements, in particular the MI Next. It took on a life of its own because it kind of came up and became viral at a time when the Black community was really rallying around some of the victims of those crimes that happened in 2014. So I think what happens is the initial movement that it was intended to bring attention to gets kind of stifled by a larger movement that's occurring, just because there's just a lot of attention around it, and just the nature of the beast when it comes to media itself. So I guess in terms of hashtagging and sort of that, things have gone wrong. I imagine that's probably the best example of that. But the cool part is when you have people or organizations like Media Mobilizing Project or even Generosity who are doing that deeper dive into these hashtags to find out who are the players and where do these come from, how do these things originate, we can then through our own media landscape talk about some of that where those things originated and talk about how it's been connected to other movements. So it's I think just to kind of talk a little about, to go back to what Brian's point was, like not really intending for something to go viral, but just intending for it to start a conversation and really just to give a different picture to an issue really helps to get people talking without feeling the need to hide and pretend as if these things aren't happening in their lives or their communities.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, ultimately, what movements exist in all shapes and sizes, right? So it doesn't have to be something that catches, 100,000 clicks. A movement can be, 10, 20 people, right? Um, that's a great answer. So I don't see any other questions coming in from the audience. Do you guys have anything left, any parting words for folks to keep in mind?
Yeah. So one of the things that at least the Philadelphia EPIP chapter intends to investigate is a way to continue this conversation. We're sort of playing around with doing bi-monthly Twitter chats just around, some of the topics we talked about today, and also just how to get some of these organizations that are doing great work, like Media Mobilizing Project, part of the conversation to help folks understand how they can get involved beyond the hashtag. What does happen when a hashtag goes viral and it's no longer connected to the issue that it started with, and just a way for the community to continue to talk about what's happening around them, so we can continue to give a new face to some of the debates that are happening. So we definitely will be sending that information out to folks once we get that up and running.
That is great. Actually and it looks like we have a bit of time, so if you all, and I mean we've kind of talked on this a bit already, but it just came in from Rashonda. I wonder how people know how to connect a hashtag to real-life action. Do you think organizations should connect their work to hashtags when applicable?
Brian, I think you should answer that
I'm
question.
doing the head nod thing, but I should probably say a few words.
Yes, the answer is
yeah,
yes.
I mean, I think it's definitely definitely a yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the things too, even social media spaces that may feel limited in the audience, or say your core constituency, for example, isn't there. Something pretty early on that we experienced, we were trying to reach parents in public schools, but then the adoption of Twitter at that point didn't really reach those parents that we were trying to reach, right? But inside Twitter was reaching journalists. It was reaching politicians, and so there's these definitely these communities of users that you can reach through the different tools, and so I think it's definitely great to explore and try, especially for being able to reach new audiences, and then just try different tools too, right? So Instagram, for example, has a really different following amongst young people. And then you have on Twitter with people in professional settings. So being able to actually try out your hashtag and your approaches on the different platforms gives you space to see what will succeed best.
That's great. Thanks again, Brian. All right, so with no more questions, I know Sharon said, as she mentioned, we're going to reach out, folks, with some more information on that plan to kind of stay connected. And we just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this conversation. And as we mentioned again, the recording, webinar recap will be available on the EPIP website. And we'd love you all to fill out the post-webinar survey, help us improve our webinars. Always looking to make adjustments where we can, and just want to thank Sharon and Brian for joining us today. It was a great conversation. You two made it happen, and we're happy to use new media to talk about new media anytime we can. So we appreciate it, guys, and hope we can do this again soon down the road.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.